before you had a name, before you had a face, before you had ever opened your eyes, you already knew your mother's voice. Not her name, not her face, just a sound, a rhythm, a vibration moving through water, and somehow that was enough. Most people think memory starts at birth, that the story of you begins the moment you take your first breath. But that's not true. Your story, or at least someone's story, started months earlier, in the dark. And whoever that someone was, they were already listening. This is a story about how you met your mother, not the moment you think it happened, months before that, before you had ears that worked the way ears are supposed to, before you had a mind that could remember anything at all. Here's where it gets strange. Around week 25 of pregnancy, something switches on inside a developing fetus. The inner ear finishes forming. The auditory system begins to work. Not perfectly, not clearly, but enough. Sound doesn't travel through air in there, it travels through fluid, through bone, through flesh. Everything is muffled, distorted, low and slow, like a voice underwater, except for one sound. Your mother's voice doesn't just travel through the air to reach you. It travels through her bones, through her own body, directly into yours. It arrives louder, clearer, closer than any other sound in your world. For the last 3 months before you were born, that voice was the loudest thing in your universe, and your brain, as undeveloped as it was already listening to it. Scientists assumed for decades that this didn't matter, that a fetus couldn't learn, couldn't form any kind of lasting impression. Then, in 1980, 2 researchers in North Carolina decided to test that assumption. Their names were Anthony DeCasper and William Pfeiffer. And the experiment they designed was almost embarrassingly simple. They gave newborn babies, some just hours old, a pacifier wired to a recording device. If the baby sucked one way, they'd hear a recording of their own mother's voice. If they sucked a different way, they'd hear a stranger's voice instead. No one told the babies which was which. There was no way for them to know. Except there was. Within hours of being born, the babies figured it out, and they consistently, deliberately, sucked in the pattern that played their mother's voice, hours old, eyes barely open, and already choosing her out of everyone else in the world. The study was published in the journal Science. It changed everything, because it proved something scientists had dismissed for a century. Learning doesn't start at birth. It starts in the dark, weeks before you arrive. But this was only the surface, because a voice is one thing. A voice can be loud, constant, hard to miss. But 6 years later, DeCasper ran a stranger experiment, and what he found was harder to explain. He asked pregnant women to read one specific story out loud every day for the last 6 weeks of pregnancy. The story was The Cat in the Hat. Same story, same rhythm, same pattern of sounds, over and over for weeks. After the babies were born, he tested them again, the same pacifier trick. One pattern played the familiar story, the other played a new one they'd never heard, and the babies chose the familiar one, every time. Not because they understood English, they didn't. Not because they knew the plot, they recognized the rhythm, the pattern of sound they had already heard, from inside a body they no longer lived in. Something in them remembered, even though nothing in them could possibly remember anything. And that's where the story stops being simple, because here's the problem. The part of your brain responsible for conscious storytelling memory, the hippocampus, wasn't built yet. Not in a newborn, not even close. It wouldn't be functional for another 2 to 4 years. So whatever was happening in that baby's mind, it wasn't memory, not the kind you and I mean when we use that word. There's no story being written, no narrator, no sense of, I was there and now I remember it. So what was it then? Scientists have a name for it. Implicit memory. It's not the kind of memory you can describe in words. It's the kind your body carries without asking your permission. The same system that lets you ride a bike years after you learned without consciously remembering the lesson. It lives in older, deeper structures. The brainstem, the cerebellum. Circuits that were already working long before the hippocampus came online. In other words, 2 completely different memory systems exist inside you. One that came online first, silently, recording rhythms and patterns with no story attached. And one that came online years later. The one that gives you an I. a narrator, a self who can say, I remember. The second one is the you that you think of as yourself, but the first one got there before you did, which raises an uncomfort.